also a topic very interesting to us. First of all, let me introduce. This is a first event series of the 5-year partnership between Hong Kong Baptist University Tsung-I Academy of Sinology and the Institute of Oriental Studies of Russian Academy of Sciences, JAS and IOS, together with the Research Center for History and Culture, Beijing Normal University and UIC. We will co-organize an online monthly seminar series from October last year to July this year. Now, the title of this talk by Professor Shaughnessy is the Tsinghua Xinian, a tomb test of the Zhushu jinian. First of all, I must apologize that for the Chinese translation of this tomb test is wrong, because it's not a stele test. It's stele inscription. It's not 墓碑. It's the tomb test of 几种竹书, also the bamboo strips in the tomb. This lecture, Professor Shaughnessy, I don't think I need to talk too much about Professor Shaughnessy to introduce here, because everyone here, I think, knows that he's a leading scholar in the field of philology, paleography, archaeology, and the intellectual and the institutional history of early China. His major field of research are Western Zhou, spring and autumn, and the Warring States period, and cultural history, paleography, and study of, especially the study of a book of changes, a book of songs, and the book of documents, almost all these transmitted literature, and especially most recently the discovered archaeological texts related to the Chinese classics and the early Chinese history. I should not talk too much about Professor Shaughnessy, and he's one of the most productive scholars in the front line of research in early China. Let me pass it to Professor Shaughnessy. Professor Shaughnessy, are you there? Can you?
I am here, yes.
Start your lecture. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Professor Chen. It's a delight to be here. I think I can share my screen. Let me. Does that come through the English text?
Yes,
okay. So if that comes through, let me just start by saying that it's always a pleasure for me to work together with Professor Chen, and particularly with the Zhao Academy of Sinology at Baptist U. This particular lecture was one that his colleague Adam Schwartz asked me to do, saying that it was being in conjunction with St. Petersburg, with the Russian Academy of Sciences, and that I should speak in English. Now, looking at all of the people who have joined this lecture, it seems that English probably isn't the best choice for the lecture. But since it's been announced in that way, I think I'm going to stick with it anyways. But let me just say that you can see the title here, the Tsinghua manuscript Xinian and the Bamboo Annals, on the nature of the tomb text, which would be a mu one, not as Professor Chen just said, not a mu bei, but it's the text that came out of the tomb, and its significance for the current Bamboo Annals. I wanted, rather than to use a PowerPoint for today's lecture, I wanted to use this just PDF of my English text, because this allows me to toggle back and forth between some other screens without changing, without stopping the share and starting the share again. And I have to say that this is not a new talk, really. It's not new research. It's a paper that I published in Chinese last year in 2021 in the journal Zhenbo. And you can see here what we're talking about, Zhushu jinian muban and Jinben de Tili. So for all of you for whom Chinese is a better option than English, you can certainly go and have a look at the Zhenbo issue 22, which came out last year in 2021. This is quite a long article. It's 35 pages long or so. The English version is going to be a little shorter, and I have left off a few things in the English translation. But I was delighted when Adam Schwartz asked me to give the lecture, because it actually gave me to give the lecture in English, because it gave me a chance to put this into English, because it's, as I say, a rather complicated argument that I'm going to make, and the number of readers in English is not very great. Many more people in China would be interested. Let me say too that I have come down with some sort of a cold, and so my voice is very scratchy today. I apologize for that. But with all of that, let me get started and start with a quotation of Li Zhiqian, who says that when he went to Hong Kong to look at the Tsinghua manuscripts, he saw a few slips, and one of them was belonged to the Xinian. And he said he didn't know what sort of a text it was, but he could see that it was very similar to what he calls the Guban Zhushu jinian. And so he strongly felt its importance. And then after having worked with it, he was the main editor of the Xinian. He then studied the Guban Zhushu jinian, and he decided that he should call this text Xinian, because in his mind, it was very similar to the Guban Zhushu jinian, which is different. His understanding of the Guban Zhushu jinian is different from most other people's. And he says that most people think that the Zhushu jinian is an analytic history which gives year by year records of what happened. And so the most common analytic history that we have is the Chunqiu for the state of Lu, which year by year from Yin Gong down to Ai Gong, we know has records. And most people think that the Zhushu jinian, whether the Jinben or the Guban, is organized in the same way. But Professor Li argues that that's not the original nature of the Guban Zhushu jinian, by which he means the tomb text. And his evidence for this is one passage quoted in the Chunqiu Zuozhuan Tsung-I, so the Tang Dynasty commentary to the Chunqiu and the Zuozhuan. And it quotes the Tsung-I jinian and quotes it in this way. I hope all of you can see on the screen, there's Chinese text and the English text. And let me just say that in this paper, when I quote Li Zhiqian, writing in modern Chinese, I don't give the Chinese characters because we all understand it. But when I quote ancient sources, I give the Chinese and the English both. In any event, the Chunqiu Zuozhuan Tsung-I quotes the Tsung-I jinian in this respect with several different records. So Ping Wang Ben Shan Er Li Bo Pan Yue Taizi Yu You Wang Ju Si Yu Xi. Okay, that might be a kind of analytic record in the Zhushu jinian. It then goes on, Xian Shi. Prior to this, Shen Hou, Lu Hou, Qi Xu Wen Gong, Li Ping Wang Yu Shen. Okay, that's a different record. And the commentary says that prior to this, and then it also says, Yi Ben Taizi Gu Cheng Tian Wang. This Yi Gu, because of and therefore, is not the sort of thing that we normally see in the Chunqiu, for instance, or in other analytic records, such as the Biannian Ji at Shuihudi. It doesn't explain why things are done. And then it goes on for more events. 有王几次而国公汉又离王子与称于邪，就二王并立。21年，邪王为晋文公所下，一本非师。And then another one of these 一什么什么故什么什么，一本非师故称邪王。So this is a passage in the Tsung-I commentary that Professor Li says shows the original nature of the Zhushu jinian Muban, the tomb text. And he compares this to a Xinian passage. And I'm not going to read the entire Xinian passage here for you. This is something that, since it was published in 2013, is very well known to people in the field. It recounts the death of King Yo, his love affair with Bao Si, and who gives birth to a son named Buopan, and the king establishing Buopan as his taizi, as his heir, and then the killing of Yo Wang, and then the passage that we want to focus on is that Bang Zhun Ju Zheng Nai Li You Wang Zhi Di Yu Chen Yu Guo Shi Xie Hui Wang. Okay, so they established this Yu Chen at Guo, and this was Xie Hui Wang, and he reigned for 21 years. 历年有一年21年，今文后抽乃下回王于国。Okay, so that 21 years, we're going to come back to talk about this. The rest of this passage is one that many people have studied and discussed and debated, and for which there isn't really a good understanding of this Zhou Wang 9年. But that's not an issue for today's talk. The issue for today's talk is really this sentence here, that the Bang Zhun Ju Zheng Nai Li You Wang Zhi Di Yu Chen Yu Guo, and Li 20有一年. One thing that I should point out, that Professor Li argues in his paper that the Jinban Zhushu jinian is a late text and is a forgery. He follows Wang Guowei in this and most other Chinese historians in saying that the Jinban Zhushu jinian has no historical value. But he does note that in this case, that King You's younger brother was installed at Guo, okay, this Xie Hui Wang, that he reigned for 21 years, is consistent with what's recorded in the Jinban Zhushu jinian. We're going to talk about this later in the talk. But the question is, if this one point is correct, then how is the Jinban Zhushu jinian just an absolute forgery? How could a Ming Dynasty forger anticipate the contents of the Xinian, of the Tsinghua Xinian. It seems to me that this one point shows that we really need to take the Zhushu jinian, especially the Jinban Zhushu jinian, seriously. Now, when Professor Li called the Tsinghua manuscript Xinian, and his basis for it was his understanding of the Guban Zhushu jinian, most people have argued that his understanding, first of all, of the Xinian, and second of all, of the Guban Zhushu jinian, was faulty. The Xinian, the Tsinghua Xinian, is not really an analytic history. People try to find other kinds of genres in the Chinese literary history to correlate the Xinian with. Perhaps the best case is just the Guoyu, which tells these stories, and sometimes gives years, sometimes gives flashbacks, such as Shangshu, sometimes explains things in the way of yi shama shama, gu shama shama. So it's not really an analytic history like the Chunqiu. The second point is that his understanding of the Zhushu jinian, whether the Guban or the Muban, is also wrong. And there are hundreds of quotations of the text from the six dynasties, Sui Tang, and into the northern Song that show that the Zhushu jinian originally was an analytic text. So just like the Chunqiu. So Professor Li's understanding both of the Xinian and of the Zhushu jinian seems not to have been very, very correct. On the other hand, I say here that it might be one of those kinds of seminal mistakes, a mistake to be sure, but one that points, that causes people to rethink an issue and come up with a better understanding. And in terms of the Zhushu jinian, I hope today to show that that is the case. That when I read Professor Li's study, it caused me to go back and look at the entries in the Zhushu jinian surrounding this event and come up with a new understanding of the tomb text. So that's the topic of today's talk. I wanted to start with another sort of mistaken, so very, very authoritative figure in the Chinese literary tradition, Du Yu from the Western Jin dynasty, famous commentator on the Chunqiu and Zuozhuan that all of us know. He was one of the most famous intellectuals of his day. He died in 284, but just before he died, in 282, he went to the capital and he was able to see the newly unearthed Jizhong text. And for the Jinian, he gives the first account of what it's like. And he makes a couple of points. Most of what he's interested in is how the Xinian is similar to the Zuozhuan. And that's sort of natural, since he had just finished his commentary on the Zuozhuan. But he makes a few other points. So first of all, he says that it begins from the Shangshu, the Sandai Wang Shi. And that's one point. And then he says that it only specially records affairs of the state of Jin starting from Shangshu. Now, Shangshu is a sort of interloper in the Jin genealogy. He comes to power in 784 BC, and is in power only 3 or 4 years before he's then killed by Wen Hou, who establishes himself in 780 BC. So this is right around the last years of Zhou Xuanwang and the first years of Zhou Youwang. But he says that the Jinji starts from Shangshu, and then it continues through Wen Hou, Zhao Hou, until coming down to the Zhuangbo, which would be about 100 years later. This is another point that we're going to talk about today. He goes on with some chronology here, and then finally he says that the Zhushu jinian continues down to Wei Aiwang 12年. And so there are 3 points here that the text begins from Shangzhou, that the Jin Annals start with Shangshu, and then the last entry in the whole text is Wei Aiwang 20年. Even though Du Yu was a great scholar, he was the Li Xueqin of his day. Even great scholars make mistakes. And I suspect that this was a kind of a mistake that Du Yu made, that he was brought in and shown a couple of strips of the Zhushu jinian, the Jinian, and he then wrote this Houshu to his Zuozhuang commentary. But just as Li Xueqin came to a false understanding of the Xinian based on his first examination when he was in Hong Kong, Du Yu too makes mistakes. So of his mistakes, he says that it starts from Sha Yinzhou, whereas the main editor of the text, Zhunshu, together with his colleague He Chao, specifically stated that it began with Huangdi. And in fact, we could look and find lots of different quotations of the Jizhong Zhushu in which figures from Huangdi down to Yao and Shun are all quoted as annals. So there's a good evidential basis to argue that Du Yu's comment that it begins with the Xia, which would be with Da Yu and his son Qi, is demonstrably wrong. The second point, he mistakes this Wei Aiwang. There was no Wei Aiwang. This is something that historians of the Warring States period have known for quite some time. The king was Xiangwang, but in the Warring States period, after all the Shihao had been used up by prior kings, at least all the good ones had been used up, there became a custom to use double Shihao. And so Xiangwang, just as Xiangwang's father, Wei Huiwang, but had a double Shihao of Hui Chengwang. And Xiangwang too had a double Shihao of Xiang-I Wang. So Wei Xiang-I Wang. But Sima Qian, now that we talk about mistakes that great historians have made, Sima Qian made this mistake and thought that Xiangwang was reigning during the time that Hui Chengwang was reigning. I don't want to go into this, it's complicated, but in fact, it's quite clear that it wasn't the 20th year of Wei Aiwang, but rather the 20th year of Wei Xiangwang or Xiang-I Wang. But what I really want to talk about today is this notion that beginning from Shangshu and then followed by Wen Hou and Zhao Hou, all the way down to Zhuangbo of Quwo, that the reigns were given in the years of the Jin lords and not of the Zhou kings. But Wen Hou, note the date of his reign, 780 to 786. This coincides in the first part with the reign of King Zhou Wang. Zhou Wang reigned 781 to 771. So the first 10 years or so of his reign overlapped with that of Zhou Wang. And then the rest of his reign overlaps with Zhou Pingwang. And maybe just real quickly, I should show you the reigns of the Jin lords. So Wen Hou from 780 to 746, followed by Zhao Hou, Xiao Hou, He Hou, Ai Hou, Hou, and Jin Hou Min. These were the lords, the sort of mainline, the Dazong, if you will, lords in the Jin capital at Yi. And he says that it follows from Wen Hou to Zhao Hou to Xiao Hou and on down. But we know that when Wen Hou died in 746, then the state of Jin broke into two different factions. And there was a civil war that continued for some 75 years. And these were the lords in Quwo. So Huanshu Chengshi, the first of the Quwo lords, and then followed in turn by Zhuangbo and then Wugong. So these three lords were the Quwo lords. And Quwo Wugong eventually won the civil war. He killed Jin Hou Min and unified Jin under his own rule. Now, even though Du Yu has said that the entries in the Zhushu jinian for Jin begin with Wen Hou, in fact, if we look at quotations of the Zhushu jinian, so what is normally called the Guban Zhushu jinian, we find that there are quotations that are dated to Pingwang's reign. And I'm going to look at those first and then come back to this perhaps. But in this study of mine, both in the Chinese version and in the English version, I compare the entries in the current Bamboo Annals with the quotations of the Bamboo Annals in text up until the Northern Song, basically the Taiping Yuan. So I want to go down here. These are a few quotations that are a little bit complex to understand, but there are a couple of quotations that are perfectly straightforward analytic quotations. So in the Taiping Yuan, for instance, it says 今年约幽王8年，立保死之子约伯服为太子. You know, this is straightforward analytic history. It's dated to You Wang 8年. We could look and see that in the Jinban Zhushu jinian here on the left, we have the same record. It also includes a record that Wang Xi Situ Zhuangbo of Quwo, but here this Wang Li Bao Siji Zi Ye Bo Fu Wei Taizi. This is perfectly good evidence that the Muban of the Zhushu jinian was dated in the years of Zhou Wang. Another example is here also from the Taiping Yuan. 书纪年约 有往10年9月 Tao Xingshi, which also we could see in the Jinwen Zhushu jinian is dated in the same way, Xinian, and then Chun, and another record, and then Qiu Yue, Tao Xingshi, and then a final record. But this is evidence that I think is irrefutable that the Muban of the Zhushu jinian continued the Zhou kings from Wu Wang, Cheng Wang, Kang Wang, Zhao Wang, on down to Xuan Wang, and then You Wang. And of course, that only makes sense. Why would any annalistic history start with a usurper such as Jin Shangshu, who took over Jin rule by force, and then after just 3 or 4 years was killed by Jin Wen Hou? It makes no sense that things would be dated in his reign. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about this one entry that's found in the Zhou. And a lot of people say that this is evidence that the annals were dated in the reign of Jin Wen Hou. So it says Zhushu jinian, Jin Wen Hou 2年, 从回王自舵书法会 maybe 快克制奈区政府之巧，明治乐章10月缓工。So it seems like this is an annal that is dated in the reign of Jin Wen Hou. So this would be dated to the year 779. Jin Wen Hou's first year is 780. His second year would be 779. But there are problems with this, and problems that maybe in the question and answer period we can come back to. In the meantime, just in the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip this part of the talk, which once again is fairly complicated. But just in short, I would say this 从回王自舵府法会, just this whole thing is garbled. There's no subject to it. There's certainly not Hui Wang. This is not the Zhou king Hui, who reigned in the 6th century BC, and so this has given rise to all sorts of studies as to why this should be. But if we can agree that these 2 quotes at least show that the Muban of the Zhushu jinian, at least through Zhou Youwang, was still denominated in the years of the Zhou kings, then we can move on. That's not, at least those 10 years, 11 years of Zhou Youwang's reign are not dated in the reign of Jin Wen Hou. Do we have any other evidence that anything is dated in the reign of Jin Wen Hou or Zhao Hou after him? No, I think there isn't. And there's some more discussion here, but what I want to move on to is the whole question of this Xie Hui Wang. So Li Xueqian cited this passage in the Tsung-I commentary to the Chunqiu Zuozhuang, and already mentioned it at the beginning of the talk, that so that Guo Gonghan 右立王是以称以邪周二王丙立21年邪王为晋文公所下。So this 21年 谢王为晋文公所下. People have, such as Wang Guowei or Fang Shiming and Wang Xiuling in their Guban Zhushu jinian Ji Zheng, argue that this 20一年 ought to be Jin Wen Hou's 21st year. So if his first year is 780 BC, the 21st year would be 760 BC. So they argue that it should be 760. On the other hand, the Xinian has shown us without any doubt that this 20一年 ought to be Xie Huiwang 20一年, that he was established when Yo Wang was killed, 771. So his first year would be 770, and his 21st year would be 750. So there's a 10-year gap there between what Wang Guowei and other scholars who follow Du Yu in saying that these entries are given in the reign of Jin Wen Hou, and what the Xinian says. The Xinian is absolutely unambiguous in this respect. It says that Xie Huiwang was killed in 750 BC. Now, what's worth looking at, and this is what Li Xueqin had said was something surprising to him, that the Jinban Zhushu jinian for the 21st year of Zhou Pinglong, which is also 750 BC, has this record, 20一年, 晋文后杀王子于陈以歇, which coincides almost exactly with the Xinian record. So number one, it says that the Jinban Zhushu jinian can't be entirely a forgery that just someone in the Ming Dynasty has concocted. But number two, if it gives this date, 20一年, in the reign of Zhou Pinglong, then it's not given in the reign of Jin Wen Hou. So that it seems that even for the first 21 years of the Eastern Zhou portion, so after Yo Wang's death, that events are still being given in the reign of a Zhou king. Maybe it's Xie Huiwang's reign. We can't know for sure. The Jinban Zhushu jinian gives it in the reign of Pinglong. Now, if we look at the quotations again in of the Zhushu jinian, so what we would normally call the Guban Zhushu jinian, we'll find that these quotations start with the reign of Zhuangbo. And so here, these are annals that have to do with the Jin Civil War between 745, so after the death of Jin Wen Hou. So this is during the reign of Zhao Hou and so forth, on down to Shuwo Wugong. But what we'll find is that for the first 15 years after Jin Wen Hou, first of all, there are no quotations of Jin Wen Hou, with the exception of that one that I pointed to, which is problematic. But then thereafter, there are no quotations. And in fact, there are no quotations dated to Zhao Hou or Xiao Hou or to any of the other mainline lords of Jin who were in the capital at Yi. In fact, all of the quotations thereafter are given in the lords of Quwo. So starting with Zhuangbo Yuannian, and it goes on, we'll see that all of the other quotations, whether dated, giving the Lord's name or not, So here, all of the ones that give the Lord's name. So Jin Zhuangbo of Quwo, Zhuangbo of Shinian, Zhuangbo. So here is a case of Ihou Fachuo, but in fact, this isn't dated to a year, so we don't know how that fits. And then we come down, moving through the years. Jin Wugong is the third of the three Chuo rulers. So once again, Wugong Yuannian, Wugong Qinian. This Banian is also Wugong Banian. And so on down. All of the quotations that we would normally regard as the Guban Zhushu jinian give not the mainstream lords of Jin, but rather give the date in the year of the Chuo lords. Now, there are a couple of, one thing that I would say is that this too is natural, just as it only makes sense that events in the reign of Zhou Youwang would still be dated according to the Zhou kings. So for the Eastern Zhou portion, for the Jin portion of the Jushu jinian, it doesn't make sense that the losers of the Civil War would be used to date events for this 70-year period from 745 to 679 BC. It only makes sense that the winners, so there's an old saying that the victors write the history, and here the victors, so Huanshu, Zhuangbo, and Zhuangbo, Wugong are the people whose reigns are given the most credence. I wanted to point out that there are a couple of records that are quite interesting in this respect. And these are both found in the Lushi of Luobi. So the Lushi was written at the very end of the Southern Song dynasty, but it probably goes back pretty much to the beginning of the Southern Song. And it includes quite a number of quotations of the Xinian. Many of them probably taken over from the Taiping Yuan, but some of them are also unique to the Lushi. And there are two records in the Lushi, one of them dated to Jin Wugong Banian, Zhou Shi Guo Shi Wei Wei, Chu Rei Bo Wan Er Dongzhi. On the other hand, in the same dread, Jinian Youyun, Huan Wang, 12年秋, Qin Rei Dong Wang Shi Qin Shi Wei Wei, Chu Rei Bo Wan Er Dongzhi. Now note that the first one of these is given in the years of Jin Wugong, and the second one is given in the reign of Zhou Huan Wang. This is not to say that the Muban of the Zhushu jinian was dated according to the Eastern Zhou kings, Ping Wang, Huan Wang, and so on. But it is to say that in the Southern Song dynasty, there was a text extant that gave dates in the years of the Zhou kings, just as we find in the Zhushu jinian, in the Jinban Zhushu jinian. So this is pretty powerful evidence that the Jinban Zhushu jinian and its structure, dating things to the reigns of the Zhou kings, is not a Ming dynasty forgery. It's already in the Southern Song that there's a text of this sort extant. Now, if we look at the record in the Jinban Zhushu jinian, we can find a couple of interesting things. So it also dates it to the 12th year of Huan Wang. If we can go up here. Yeah, so this 719 Huan Wang Yuan and so forth. But we come down here to Shaonian. Okay. One other thing to note, there's a slight difference between these two quotations. So the one that's dated to Jinwu Gongbanian refers to the Zhou and the Guoshi here. But note the second one refers to Wang Shi and Qin Shi. And in fact, we have here in the Jinbenzhu Jinian a reference to the Wang Shi and to the Qin Shi surrounding Wei. And this is the kind of natural mention that you wouldn't refer, just as in the Chunqiu of Lu, you never refer to Lu. It's always Wu or something like that. In a Zhou Annals, you would never refer to Zhou. You only refer to Wang Shi. So it seems to me that this is an interesting textual variant that's worth thinking about. Now, the other thing, we don't have time today to look at each and every one of these entries, but if we just scroll through from the very first quotation, so Jin Zhuangbo Yuan Nian, Wu Yu Xue, we find that Zhuangbo's Yuan Nian was 730 BC. And 730 BC also corresponds to the 41st year of Zhou Pingwang. And in that year, we find that the Jinbenzhu Jinian has a similar record. Da Yu Xue. I don't know. I'm not Chinese. I don't know much about these sorts of things, but it seems to me that in an annalistic history, you would not record that it didn't snow. You would record that it snowed a lot in that year. So I think this textual variant is evidence that the Jinbenzhu Jinian, if it were made up just on the basis of quotations of earlier sources, such as the Taiping Yuan, it would have given Wu Yu Xue. But it's, I think, correct here. So that's one thing. But the second thing is that the date, 730, given in Zhuangbo's reign, is the same date in absolute terms as given in the Jinbenzhu Jinian. And in fact, if we just scroll through here, you'll find that with only one or two possible exceptions, each one of these dates given in the reigns of Zhuangbo or Wugong corresponds exactly with the Jinbenzhu Jinian, where it gives the dates in the reigns of Zhou Pingwang and Zhou Huanwang. I'm just gonna, I don't have time to talk about each and every case here, but you can look at these, or if you want to look at the Chinese article, the same quotations are given there. So on down to Jinwu Gong Yuan Nian. So Xinian 709 corresponds to Huan Wang Shi Nian. And all of these correspond perfectly. So every single quotation has a corresponding entry in the current text, almost always with exactly the same wording. And while the quotations are dated according to the reign years of the Chua rulers, and whereas the current text gives them in the Zhou kings, they all all refer to the same absolute chronology. And here I talk about a couple of exceptions and show that the exceptions are because the quotations have slight mistakes in them. And that in fact, the Jinban Zhushu jinian is a better historical reference than the quotation. So the Guban Zhushu jinian is not as accurate as the Jinban Zhushu jinian when there are differences such as those. And I think we're coming up to almost an hour into the talk, and I was asked to speak for no more than an hour, so I should come to the conclusion. And I think for the conclusion, I want to read what I have written here, because it makes sure that I will say what I wanted to say when I was writing and thinking about this. So if you could just bear with me as I read through the conclusion to the article, that there's no doubt that Li Zhiqian's characterization of the Tsinghua manuscript Xinian and the Bamboo Annals was fundamentally flawed. It's just wrong. I think most scholars recognize that it was wrong. Although the title that he gave the manuscript Xinian on the basis of this misunderstanding is by now probably too well entrenched in the scholarly literature to be revised, his characterization of the nature of the text has proved much less influential. Indeed, most Chinese scholars have simply disregarded it without mention. And the few Western scholars who've studied the text simply note that the text is not in annals at all. So the Xinian is just mistitled and sort of mischaracterized by Li Zhiqian. On the other hand, his view of the Bamboo Annals, and especially of the current text Bamboo Annals, is still very much in the mainstream of Chinese scholarship. So I've been studying the Jinban Zhushu jinian now for 40 years, and I know very well that most Chinese scholars think that this is all a waste of time, because the Jinban Zhushu jinian is simply a late forgery and has no basis. What I'm trying to show with this, yet again, is that there is some historical basis to the Jinban Zhushu jinian. So I hope to have shown in this study that Li Zhiqian was not the only scholar to mischaracterize that text, which is to say the Zhushu jinian and the Muban. He was simply following other great Chinese historians from Du in the years immediately after the text discovery to Wang Guowei writing in 1917. Unfortunately, their misperceptions have proved to be much more influential, such that the great majority of Chinese scholars regard Wang Guowei's conclusions about the text to be the final word, even though some of his basic claims can readily be shown to be wrong. The most obvious of these mistakes is that Wang, like Du before him, argued that the Jin annals begin even before the end of the Western Zhou period, either with Shangshu or Duke Wen of Jin or Lord Wen of Jin, despite there being clear evidence that the annals of the Zhou kings continued through the reign of King You, as we should surely expect. This is not just a trivial matter of a few years difference, but ramifies over the course of the next 100 years of annals. The tomb text of the Bamboo Annals did indeed switch to denominating years according to the reigns of the Jin rulers at some point during this time. But unlike what Du Yu and Wang Guowei said, that these rulers were the mainline rulers at the Jin capital of Yi, all of the evidence shows that the text was organized according to the reign years of the rebel Quwo faction in the Jin Civil War. And as I mentioned before, this is entirely as we should expect, since it was the Quwo faction that ultimately defeated the mainline rulers. The victors wrote the history. This too is not a trivial difference, since I've demonstrated that the current text Bamboo Annals, which both Wang Guowei and Li Zhiqian called a worthless forgery, reflects the same underlying analytic structure as the tomb text. True, the current text is denominated according to the reign years of the Zhou kings rather than the Jin rulers, but its chronology is exactly as the same as that of all the early quotations of the Bamboo Annals, even though the chronology of those early quotations is by no means transparent. Some of them are fairly complicated, but if you can work through the history, you can date them, and the Jinban Zhushu jinian is always the same date. What's more, the current text also reflects the Quwo bias of the original Jin annals. And this is an important point, I think, that these annals for these years are written from the viewpoint of the Quwo rulers, not from the mainline Jin rulers at the capital of Yi. And no late forger, no matter when he may have been working, could have produced such a text that also reflects the Quwo rulers. Instead, the simplest explanation is that the original editors of the Jizhong manuscripts, who most assuredly did not include Duyu, despite occasional assumptions to the contrary, produced the current text, or at least a text very much like it, in the course of editing the tomb text. For them, the reign years of the Zhou kings would have served as a common standard, more or less akin to the modern use of years BCE and CE. The addition of the text denominated according to the reign years of the Zhou kings was probably intended only as a reference guide, as the editors attempted to reconstruct the chronology of the Jin and then the Wei rulers. Nevertheless, there's also evidence that this version circulated beyond just the team of editors. For instance, it was quoted in the early 4th century CE in Ganbao's Shoushengji. Now the discovery of the Tsinghua manuscript Xinian has not only demonstrated yet again that the Zhushu jinian, including very much the Jinban Zhushu jinian, is an important source for the history of ancient China. But perhaps even more important, it provides a clue concerning the nature and organization of the text that was found in the tomb at Jixian some 1750 years ago. What is more, mistakes made in the course of editing the Xinian also suggest how mistakes might have been made both in the editing of the Bamboo Annals and also in the long history of scholarship on it. We're fortunate that new evidence provides the means to undo these mistakes, and we have every reason to hope for even more evidence in the future. So with that, I will turn this back to Professor Chen and be very happy to entertain any questions that anyone might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Should I stop? Should I stop sharing or?
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shaughnessy. It's extremely interesting and inspiring talk with solid evidence provided on the test. I'm wondering now it's time. We have about 20 minutes, so we have plenty of time open for the floor. So may I invite participants, audience, to raise questions here, if there is any. You have 160 people.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
That some people who might have questions but might be a little shy about speaking English ought to feel free to speak Chinese.
That's good. Great.
Mandarin.
Great. Yeah.
Mandarin Chinese, not Cantonese, I'm sorry.
中文也可以啊，我们用中文也可以。大家看有没有什么问题？
两位老师您好，可以听到我的声音吗？
可以，很
听到。
我是这个 复旦大学大四的学生，历史系大四的学生。那么很高兴今天能够聆听老师的讲座。那么我之前在本科阶段，就是也初步的了解了一下这个清华简4年这个，因为当初在这个阅读相关材料的时候，就发现其实对于系年的性质有很多的说法。那么但是经过一些阅读材料之后，就是感觉好像目前所有的说法都存在不合理的地方。比如说它是系年，比如说是国志的，还有是超撮类的文献。就想请问一下，夏寒怡教授，目前西方学界对这个系年的性质是怎样定性？它是属于哪样一种材料呢？
那我就用中文来回答，因为我这个问题就不容易回答，因为西方学者对系年也没有多少说明。大概有2个人在研究这个系年，一个是以色列的那个尤瑞，Uri Pines，那么另外一个是一个英国学者，但是在南朝鲜工作的Olivia Milburn， 他们2个人都发表了研究，Uri 特别是出版了一部完整的翻译。他们2个人就是说，它不像一个系年，不像一个编年记，但是什么意思，是什么样子，这个也很难说。尤瑞因为他对左传特别感兴趣，所以他觉得这个系年和左传是非常相似的，但是他也不下一个定论，说就是左传式的一个史书。那么除了他们2个以外，我觉得没有第3个人在讨论系年。
应该有第3个就是你啊，你本人夏教授。
老师，谢谢老师的回答。老师您好，就是因为之前我读过这个日本学者藤田胜久先生的这个《史记战国史料研究》，那么他当时在这个对于秦本纪的分析里，就是将秦本纪的把它分成了像系年资料、记事资料，还有这个世系资料这几块。那么其实我们借鉴他的方法来看，就是我初步思考，觉得这个像清华简系年，它是详于记事而略于系年的，那么它比较可能的就是应该是接近于像左传这种长于记事的东西，而不是像春秋那种是按一年一年编下来。那么还有就是像我们学校有林志鹏老师，他本人的研究就是倾向于认为这个系年是超撮类的文献，像虞氏这个赵国虞氏这个春秋就超撮类的。但是因为超撮类之后读这个陆谷的新语，我似乎认为像超撮类这样的文献应该是对于这个历史的道德表达可能比较强烈，而不是像这样详于记事的文献。所以这是我目前的一点思考。谢谢老师。
其实你说的和我刚开始说话的时候，这个讲演说系年对我来说有一点像国语，是很相似的。那么要说是像左传，问题就是左传特别复杂。那么除了说故事的这些部分，还有一些系年，还有一些编年，还有其他的，那么也是说道德。那国语我觉得它的体例比较朴素，比较简单，比左传稍微简单一点。所以我宁愿说系年和国语比较相似，不一定是 左传就特别麻烦，特别复杂。那么当然，细年是像左传的很多部分，但是也有左传其他的部分一点也不像，所以我的原因就是这个。
好的，谢谢老师，谢谢老师。
很好，这同学问的问题非常好啊。下面我们还有时间，大家看还有什么问题？
您好，您好，夏海一教授，非常认真的听了您讲座，然后我想问一个问题，刚才您讲到正桓公，桓公，正，那个系年里，这个纪年里说他是惠王的儿子，惠王的儿子，但是这跟历史上的记载好像有点不太一样。刚才您只是说这个问题比较复杂，没有去不详细解释，所以我想问您一下，就是您对这个郑桓公的他的生平他是怎样的一个世系是怎么理解的？因为他跟历史上这个纪年的记载跟历史上非常不一样，非常不一样，所以这个问题想问您一下。好，谢谢您。
其实这个问题提得非常好。要回答这个问题，我必须再一次 share screen， 就是给你看看我这个文件，要找一下，请忍耐一下，哎呀，是这个，是水晶柱印了这个，说晋文后2年，同惠王自多夫法会，这个惠王你说的很对，这个是东周100年以后的一个纣王，肯定不是他。那么有人说这个惠应该是玄王的一个谥文，这个新晋就很容易就错。我觉得这个惠和玄也不一定太相似，但是多夫也不是玄王的儿子，我们知道多夫这个郑桓公是厉王的儿子，那么也有人说这个惠应该是厉王的一个谥文，但是这个都没有文献的证据，我们只能说这样的一个印文是有问题的。那另外一个问题就是说，同惠王这个没有一个注语，是谁跟这个惠王儿子一起法会？那么问题就不仅仅是如此，还有其他的问题。那么譬如说有陈赞应该也是西晋时代编辑几种著述的一个人，我们都知道他对《汉书》是做了一个注解，我们经常就看到这个，但是他也有几次是谈到竹书纪年，那么他这个英文我们看他是说就子母往以下读与西征，这个都和郑国的开元有关系。那么然后他说有往几百2年，他是说桓公出桓公为周司徒，这个我们也知道，在周幽王时代，桓公是做了这个周司徒，那么在国语有非常有名的一个故事，就是他与这个师伯把他们的菜粮都运到东方的郑国，那么然后他有这个有往击败 流亡几百周是公元前771年。我们也知道舵夫也就是甄嬛宫和游王，他们2个人一起死了，就在骊山之下。这个也是很多文献都说的，但是他这边说游王击败2年而灭会，4年而灭国，至于征服之巧，这个也是非常乱的一个英文。因为在游王击败甄嬛宫已经死掉了，他在公元前771年就跟游王一起死了。那怎么会说2年而灭会？那我觉得这个2年而灭会应该正好是游王2年而灭会，并不是晋文后2年，是游王2年而灭会。那么我们如果看看金本竹书纪年，那这个就是平王2年，有一些这个地震的记载。那么然后晋文后从王子国父发赠或者曾克制，这个就是水晶柱所引用的，也就是陈赞所引用的那个记载。不应该是会，而应该是曾，这个和系年也有关系。那么也不是在游王击败以后，而应该是在游王还没有被杀了。那么应该是2年。也不应该是晋文后的2年，应该是周幽王的2年。那么那是一点。另外一点，这个4年而灭国，4年而灭国，这是什么时候的一个记载？那么并不是甄嬛宫，
对，这很晚了，
应该是在游王击败以后4年而灭国。要说明这一点，我们必须跑到以后的金本竹书纪年。我这里就没有引用，但是金本竹书纪年就平王4年，就平王4年，就是公元前767年，就是平王。那么延庆后祖，那么然后郑人灭国，并不是甄嬛宫，也不是舵夫，而是郑人灭国。那么陈赞为什么要引用这个？因为他在那个地方正好是要说明郑国是它的开源是怎么样的。这个通通都是说郑国，那么甄嬛宫，那么然后这个4年而灭国也是郑国的一个事件。但是他弄错了，好像是说甄嬛宫灭国，但是他那个时候已经死掉，但是不能够。那么这个正好应该是郑人灭国，也应该是平王4年。那么金本纪年正好有这个记载。
I have a first question. Because we know that Guo have 5. We have 5 Guo.
Yeah.
So which Guo?
Which one?
Xiguo. Or because we know that if we call this Sanmenxia, it's very late. The Guo is actually wiped out by Jin. Which Guo?
So So the problem is this mia. What does it mean? And so I've translated as wiped out. Okay, oftentimes we say annihilated, exterminated, something like that. But if you read the Zhuozhuan, for instance, it's very frequent that a state is mia in 1 year, and then 5 years later, they talk about it again. So that mia simply, I think, means defeated. So that I suspect this guo is the Samanxiada guo. But of course, as you say, we have lots of different guos. And when it mentions one, we don't have any means of demonstrating which one it is. But I think the problem is not the guo here, but the mia. And it just means that he defeated, or the Dongren defeated guo. Okay?
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions from floor?
Yeah. We?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Professor, can I ask comparatively general questions regarding the Sinology? Because nowadays there are people doing research on Western paleographies in maybe Eastern or Chinese perspective, and may I know that what's your suggestions to those people who are interested to do research on this kind of field, and then what are the things that need to be cautious and be careful about? Because now my PhD dissertation is very much related to this field, and I sometimes I may find some confusions between different perspectives, and I hope to seek for some suggestions. Thank you.
So I'm not sure that I understand exactly. So what you're interested in is Western scholarship on Chinese paleography. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. As opposed to just Western studies of Western paleography, for instance, which is a completely different field. You know that 5 years ago, I published a book with Shanghai Guji called Xiguan Hanji, in which I give an overview of the development of the field in the West from basically 1900 down to 2015. I stopped there. And the field certainly has grown in many ways. I think that it's important in your dissertation to trace the development of the field rather than looking at what is being published today and thinking that the field has always been that way, is to trace it from the origins. And typically this field we divide into 3 different subfields. So oracle bone studies, bronze inscriptions, maybe stone inscriptions as well, and then jianbo, bamboo and silk studies. And each one of these 3 subfields has had a developmental history in the West. And of course, nowadays, most people in the West, just like most people in China, are mainly interested in jianbo, in bamboo and silk manuscripts. But I suppose my main advice would be to try to trace the development of the field. Now, I can say one other thing, that that book was published by Shanghai Guji Chubanshe, I think in 2017, and then also in Shanghai, but the Zhongxi Shuju asked me to edit 3 volumes. 1 volume for oracle bone studies, 1 volume for bronze and stone inscriptions, and 1 volume for Jianbo. And what we've done with that is for each one of these 3 volumes, I've selected about 25 or so of the most important articles in Western languages, mainly in English, but occasionally also in French, and had them translated into Chinese. And together with an introduction by me, we're hoping that those 3 volumes will be published someday. But everything seems to have come to a halt in Shanghai, maybe because of COVID, maybe for other reasons, I don't know. And the books haven't moved, but we're interested in getting those published. And so with those, that would be about 75 volumes, 75 different articles published in Western languages that will be available in Chinese. And I think will give a pretty good history of the development of the field.
Hey, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, I have received a question in writing. What's your point of view on Mu Tianzi Zhuan? That was found with Bamboo Annals of the same time. At the same time, and did King Mu visited Western Asia? So can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I hear you. I'm very interested in the Mu Tianzi Zhuan. I think that it's a very complicated text to answer in a straightforward manner. Professor Chen will know that I published in the journal of the Raozongyi Academy of Sinology a study of the Mu Tianzi Zhuan and Western and bronze inscriptions from the time of Zhou Muwang. And there are names in the Mu Tianzi Zhuan that occur also in bronze inscriptions, and it's very strange how we all think that the Mu Tianzi Zhuan is a Warring States kind of fictional account of Mu Wang's travels, but how did they know these names in particular? And so it seems to me that there has to be some sort of an historical basis for the account. On the other hand, I don't think that it goes back to the time of Zhou Muwang. It's a later historical account that has some basis. One of the things that I've also argued with respect to the Mu Tianzi Zhuan is that we really have to be careful about the editions that we use, and we have to do basic Wenxianxue before we start talking about what the nature of the text is. So the Mu Tianzi Zhuan that we find today is in 6th Zhuan, but there's good reason to think that the original text was only in 5th Zhuan, that the 6th Zhuan is the story of Zhou Muwang, Meiran Shengji, and that's a separate text. And I think also that the 5th Zhuan is of a different nature. And so if we want to study the text itself, we should focus on the first 4 Zhuan. And I think that there probably were different editions that circulated through at least the Tang Dynasty and maybe through the Northern Song Dynasty. And I published an article a couple of years ago in a volume that Zhu Yuanqing edited in honor of Zhushu and his studies, both of the Zhushu jinian and of ancient history. And I think it's an article that probably most people won't read, but it's worth reading because it gives evidence that at least 2 different editions of the Mutian Zedran were being circulated through the middle period of Chinese history, and they had different organizations. Now, the last part of your question, whether Muwang went to Central Asia, I doubt it, but who knows? People moved around a lot in ancient times, and nothing about antiquity surprises me.
Thank you, Professor Shaughnessy. Because of time, I think we don't have the time to take more questions. I see some other more questions. I suggest you probably contact Professor Shaughnessy personally, or you can write him by email, like email from the web page of University of Chicago, many places actually. So let's stop here, and thank you very much, Professor Shaughnessy, and thank you also for all the participants. I think Professor Shaughnessy, especially Professor Shaughnessy, and I know he's not feeling well. He's suffering from a fever, and we appreciate it very much. Okay, many thanks again. Okay.
Thank you, Tunjer. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Take care.